Moab police say they have solved a cold case after over 5 decades of unanswered questions.
On March 2, 1973, the partially dressed body of 46-year-old Ann Woodward was found viciously murdered inside the bar she owned with her husband in Moab, Utah. The crime scene showed just how horrific the act was. The police had several suspects, including the notorious serial killer Ted Bundy. Unfortunately, the case reached a dead end and went cold. For 51 years, the gruesome murder haunted the small desert town of Moab. In 2024, however, a long-hidden piece of evidence surfaced, resolving the case at last and proving what many had suspected for years. Although Moab has changed a lot over the past 50 years, Woody's Tavern has remained pretty much the same. Since its opening in 1952, it has remained a beloved local establishment. In the 1970s, it was a vibrant hub where cowboys, miners, and individuals from various backgrounds gathered for drinks and socializing. Much of its enduring charm can be attributed to Leslie Woody Woodward and his wife Ann Hammer Woodward, who both owned and managed the venue. Everything was going smoothly until a tragedy struck right within the tavern's walls. On the early morning of March 2, 1973, Woody awoke to find that his wife Ann had not returned home. Ann had been working alone at the bar the previous night and was expected to come back after closing. Fearing that something might be wrong, Woody hurried to the bar, only to be confronted with a scene of unimaginable horror. At around 6:45 a.m., Woody entered Woody's Tavern to find an unsettling silence. His heart sank as he discovered Ann's half-dressed body sprawled on the floor between two pool tables. Ann wore only a bra and an unbuttoned blouse, with her pants pulled down. The right leg of her pants, turned inside out and knotted, had been used to strangle her and was still wrapped tightly around her neck. The cash register had been emptied with about $75 missing. Overwhelmed and in shock, Woody reached out to his friend Heck Bowman, who was the Grand County Sheriff at the time. This was a pivotal point in the investigation. As it turned out, Woody's Tavern didn't fall under the Grand County Sheriff's Office jurisdiction. Instead, it was under the purview of the Moab Police Department. The strained relationship between the two departments significantly impacted the investigation, leading to a series of missteps and mishandling of the case. When Moab Police Chief Melvin Dalton arrived at the scene in 1973, the situation was already in disarray. Despite the Grand County Sheriff's Office being on site, they had failed to properly secure the area, allowing numerous people to enter and exit freely. By the time Dalton's team took over, he feared that crucial evidence from the crime scene had been compromised. The autopsy uncovered additional grim details. The medical examiner reported that Ann had been beaten and assaulted, with her time of death estimated between 1:40 a.m. and 2:30 a.m. Unfortunately, the investigation yielded no leads for an arrest. Despite the setbacks, the Moab police gathered 29 pieces of evidence, including ashtrays, fingernails, hair, fingerprints, and salt shakers. From the outset, the investigation encountered significant challenges. Due to improper processing of the crime scene, there were no clear leads on suspects. Almost everyone who had visited the bar or was a regular at Woody's was considered a potential suspect. Adding to the difficulty, the Moab Police Department lacked the resources and expertise to handle such a complex case. Chief Dalton and his team had no specialized homicide training. Dalton later admitted that with a skilled detective on the case, their chances of solving it might have been significantly improved. Despite these challenges, Dalton did his best. The Moab police managed to identify about 25 potential suspects, and even administered polygraph tests to some of them. However, many suspects hired attorneys and refused to cooperate. The detectives also focused on finding the person who had sat next to Ann, thinking they might be the killer. They sent bar glasses to the FBI for fingerprint analysis, but the results came back inconclusive. Among the many suspects, 3 stood out to the police: 2 local mining workers and Ted Bundy, the infamous serial killer, who was active in the 1970s. Bundy became a prime suspect due to his history of assaults and murders of women in the area at that time. However, concrete evidence linking him to Ann's murder was never found, and Bundy never confessed to the crime. Despite lacking formal homicide training, Chief Dalton was ahead of his time when it came to investigative techniques. He collected DNA samples from over 30 people and even retrieved Camel cigarette butts from an ashtray, hoping to analyze them for saliva to determine the suspect's blood type. Although Dalton's forward-thinking approach impressed the FBI, they had to return his box of evidence unopened with a letter stating, "This is a great idea, but we don't have the technology to do that." The DNA and other crucial evidence were preserved, anticipating future advancements in forensic technology. As the years passed and the Moab police made no progress in solving the case, it eventually went cold. Ann's murder left a deep and lasting mark on her family. In a 2006 article, her daughter Susan, who was just 16 at the time of her mother's death, described how that fateful morning marked the beginning of a downward spiral into depression and isolation that still affected her and her siblings. Suzanne shared that her mother's murder traumatized them all in different ways. She felt incredibly isolated and alone. Woody, her father, was devastated by grief. Suzanne's 2 brothers, Max and Bugsy, along with her sister Leslie Ann, struggled with drug and alcohol abuse for years. It became worse when rumors emerged in town suggesting that Woody might have been involved in his wife's murder. The situation deteriorated to the point where it shattered the family. Woody eventually remarried a woman named Jane and decided to sell all the businesses he had started with Ann in Moab, including Woody's Tavern. Leaving the bar where such a tragedy had unfolded brought him some measure of relief. However, the family could never escape the past of not knowing who was responsible for their suffering. Ann Woodward's case held deep personal significance for Chief Melvin Dalton. Even in 1980, when he left the department, the case still occupied a spot on his desk. He maintained contact with Ann's children into the early 2000s. Unfortunately, he passed away, never knowing who had committed the murder. In 2006, Suzanne Woodward reached out to Moab Police Chief Mike Navarre, leading to reopening of the case. By then, DNA technology had advanced significantly, but despite new possibilities, the identity of Ann's killer remained elusive, and the case went cold once more. 16 years later, in 2022, Moab police officer Jeremy Drexler took charge of the investigation and vowed to the Woodward family that he would not rest until he solved the case. On September 14, 2023, Drexler discovered 2 cardboard boxes in the back of a Grand County storage unit containing evidence from the original 1973 investigation. Among the items were Ann's clothes from the night of her murder. These boxes had been relocated from the evidence room to an outbuilding, making them difficult to find. Nevertheless, Drexler meticulously reviewed the contents. By November of 2023, the evidence was sent to the Utah State Crime Lab for analysis. In May of 2024, the results came back, and the DNA on Ann's clothes was positively identified as belonging to Douglas Keith Chudamelka. Interestingly, Chudamelka had been identified as a potential suspect early in the investigation, one of the 3 main suspects considered at the time. At the age of 25, Chudamelka had come to Utah for mining work and had a criminal record spanning Alabama, California, Iowa, and Nebraska. But what really caught detectives' attention was that his mid-1960s Ford sedan matched the description of the car witnesses saw parked next to Ann's truck on the night of the March 1, 1973 murder. When investigators questioned Chudamelka, he claimed he hadn't been at Woody's Tavern that night, but had spent the evening drinking at the Westerner Grill, another local bar. His girlfriend, a woman named Joyce, provided an alibi, stating that Chudamelka came home around 2 a.m. although it was possible he could have committed the crime and still made it home by 2 a.m. The bartender at the Westerner Grill contradicted this, stating that Chudamelka was not at the bar on the night of the murder. On July 3, 1973, Chudamelka was arrested for domestic violence. During this time, Joyce told the police that Chudamelka had confessed to killing Ann Woodward and that she planned to share this with the county attorney. However, she later backtracked and refused to provide any further details, only confirming that Chudamelka came home at 4:10 a.m. on March 2nd, not at 2 a.m. Detective Melvin Dalton had collected hair samples from Chudamelka, but there wasn't enough evidence to advance the case. Even when Ann's case was reopened in 2006, detectives attempted to contact Joyce, but she refused to cooperate. After the murder, Chudamelka left Moab and became a truck driver. In 1978, he moved back to Nebraska, his home state, where he lived a quiet life until he passed away in 2002, without ever facing justice for his crimes. Regarding motive, Drexler speculates that Chudamelka may have been enraged after losing money to Ann in a poker game. The $50 she won from him had been taken from her pockets, and Chudamelka paid his rent 2 days later with 5 $20 bills. Although Drexler noted that there's no way to confirm if the rent was paid with the stolen money, it remains a possibility. On June 28, 2024, Drexler revealed in a press conference that Chudamelka's DNA was found on all the buttons of Ann's shirt and on the inside of her pants. This evidence indicated that Chudamelka had removed the pants, thereby confirming beyond a reasonable doubt that he was responsible for both the assault and the murder.
The pants that you can see here, they were white and blue, but when you're looking at the blue portion there, that is the inside of the pants. That is the inside of the pants. It's very, very important to recognize this because this would be brought up. This would be brought up in court if Doug was alive today. The pants, when they were removed, the right leg went inside out. The left leg did not. So when Ann is strangled with her pant leg, it's the inside of her pant leg. So if you're at a bar setting, we can brush against people, you can do transfer DNA. If your pants are inside out, it's impossible to have DNA on the inside.
Additionally, Chudamelka's DNA was found on a glass and on the seat next to where Ann had been sitting just before she was murdered. Detective Drexler stated that if Chudamelka were still alive, he would have faced the consequences of his actions.
If Doug was still alive, he died in 2002, I would certainly ask for an arrest warrant to go to Fremont, Nebraska and arrest Doug for this crime. There is enough probable cause at this point to charge him with the murder of Ann Woodward from March 2nd, 1973.
Officials announced that Chudamelka's DNA will be entered into the CODIS system, a comprehensive network of local, state, and national DNA databases used for tracking convicted offenders. Once Ann Woodward's case is officially closed, this will enable law enforcement agencies across the country to investigate Chudamelka's potential involvement in other unsolved cases. Ann Woodward's granddaughter, Annie Dalton, represented the Woodward family at the press conference, expressing their gratitude to the authorities for finally providing answers after 5 decades of waiting.
Thank you so much for caring enough to go and look for that. And thank you for both agencies for putting aside any history that prevented that collaborative effort. I think this closure has been a long time coming, and I just want to thank all of you that were involved. And if Bowman and Mel Dalton were here, I would thank them as well.
Ann's eldest and last surviving child, Leslie Woodward Estes, who was 18 when her mother was killed, acknowledged that the answers will not bring them full closure.
There's no closure for me, or it's still going to go on. She's still going to be gone tomorrow, and my children have never seen her, and they'll never know what a wonderful grandmother she would have been.
But she is relieved that the rumors about her father can now be put to rest.
It broke his heart, but it broke our family. The splinter never was healed. It never really did even begin to heal.
Perhaps now the healing process can finally begin.